if they think or do something which is, well, let's say according to Sam Harris, objectively wrong. For example, when they harm someone else. It's not that I defend them or defend anyone that does something horrible to other people or creatures, but it gives you a perspective and compassion even towards people who do bad things. And that way, I feel like my life has improved because I understand that everything is relative on one level. Even if Sam Harris's theory is right, even if there is ultimate right and the ultimate evil, like ultimate good and ultimate evil, this is kind of, for me, this is kind of another level of morality or state of being. And so on the previous one, kind of the more shallow one, everything is relative because everything depends on so many different factors around us, including where we were brought up, how our brain works, what our peers think. Everything matters. So you can't really expect everyone to have the same opinions as you do. And it's totally okay. That's how it should be. Hyde also says something very powerful, that worship of reason is a delusion. It's faith in something that does not exist. And he proposes something that I always talk about, especially when I talk about religion, that we should be more humble about the abilities of ourselves as human beings and when considering morality and social norms. So how do we grow to differ in our moral reasoning? How does it happen? So Hyde describes morality as a product of group selection, which is also another controversial topic in moral psychology field. And actually, group selection was kind of neglected. I don't remember. I think it was around 70s up until recently. Hyde says that morality is actually an evolutionary adaptation based in first societies, where humans first shared an understanding on how things were supposed to be done and felt negative when someone violated those terms. And that is how the first moral matrix was formed, to strengthen the chances of survival of the group over other groups. And so within our communities, everyone has innate receptors, as Hyde proposes, or modules for moral matrices that can develop in various ways, depending on environment, social context, where you were born, everything really. He groups these moral matrices into 6 categories, and these are care, fairness, liberty, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. Hyde claims that everyone's morality, of all the people in all communities, are based on the same moral matrices. However, different communities and different individuals put more or less emphasis on specific matrices. And therefore, all of the humans operate on the same moral values, but to various extents on each of them. And this is actually very, very relevant to the political situation around us, especially now as well, and a discourse between left and right. So 2 ends of political spectrum identify moral categories differently and put different emphasis on each of matrices. So left puts more emphasis on care, fairness, and liberty, while the right uses actually all 6 of them, but less of those of care and fairness. Hyde also argues that it's disadvantageous for the liberals because they have difficulties in bonding with their voters on emotional level, simply because of the fact that they don't bond with the voters on different matrices, while conservatives bond on moral levels in all of those aspects. However, I personally have noticed nowadays that radical left radicalizes even more and more. And I think it's not because they have found a way to have more matrices engaged. I think it's because they bond through hatred towards the radical right. And I think this makes them paradoxically becoming what they despise of. And that kind of sums up the whole woke movement. There is this interesting TED talk by Rob Willer on political polarization. And he says that studies show that both sides of the political spectrum seem to use the arguments that are only relevant to them. So it's missing the whole point of effective communication. And because the arguments that they use are only the ones that they see, liberals or the conservatives, it is hard to see what would the arguments be on the other side. So we need to change that and understand the arguments of the opposing side and effectively target them in the discussion of any kind. And so he talks about something called moral reframing, which is very simple in theory, but very hard when arguing with someone and not really listening. So, using the language of the opposing group, we can try to communicate more effectively with them. For example, when talking about the environment, liberals can try to refer to sanctity and purity of nature around us and of the planet Earth, and that God built that for us and we have to respect it, right? And that could kind of help the conservative side to see how valuable this is and how we should actually work together and find a way to cooperate because we value the same things just from different points of view. What actually is political polarization? According to Wikipedia, political polarization is the divergence of political attitudes to ideological extremes. Almost all discussions of polarization in political science consider polarization in the context of political parties and democratic systems of government. In most two-party systems, political polarization embodies the tension of its binary political ideologies and partisan identities. Political polarization actually has been increasing past 40 years or so. So I actually have to record a disclaimer here and put it up. I've been reading about political polarization in the US and globally in general, and first of all, the data is incomplete and inconsistent on whether political polarization increases or decreases, because first of all, it depends on the country. Second of all, there is no any specific database and ways to measure these things. And also above that, there is the question of that the collected data ask different questions, so it's not all unified. And so depending on what questions are asked to people, different results show different things. And so political polarization can be also understood differently in different studies and different countries, and that causes it to be quite a gray area to study. And actually, the data is not very clear whether nowadays political polarization is higher than ever before. Even some data shows that it's lower. I think maybe it's also about how the information travels. So nowadays it's kind of very easy to gain access to different types of information, and so maybe from that point of view it kind of decreases, but also there are so many, let's say, rabbit holes like conspiracy theories and stuff that, like, I think these things drive polarization. However, I'm not saying that polarization in itself is wrong. According to what I've read, it is a natural state of things in order to maintain healthy political situation in different countries and worldwide. However, political polarization is problematic when it goes to extremes. And I think that is the main premise of what I am trying to say. However, I've read as well that there is kind of a threat of suppression when political polarization is absent or minimized, instead of actually collaborating. So we have to be really careful in what direction it goes, and kind of maintaining a healthy, reasonable balance is very, very important. And there are different causes of it. And Professor T. Coleman, in his TED Talk, says that political polarization stems from the need of everyone to blame someone else for the problems around us. And the reason why we are stuck is that these different societal issues that we have, like racism, sexism, gay marriage, social media, religion, capitalism, they are so complex that they actually reinforce one another, and they are self-perpetuating. So the most comfortable thing to do is actually to find someone and blame them for it. By them, we often mean people of different opinions than us. Rabbi Popko talks also in his TED Talk about how we have tendency to push those who agree with us to the extremes, and that's called group polarization. It's actively making each other more passionate, let's say, about topics that we discuss together. And that makes us blind to other people's opinions. It creates political echo chambers when we discuss things of certain matters only with people around us and only with the people that have similar values than us. And we end up, kind of by mistake, radicalizing ourselves and each other. And this also obviously happens in social media and targeted advertising, Facebook, videos that we watch, influencers that we follow. This all creates more and more, like deeper and deeper echo chamber effect and political polarization. So I actually clearly saw that when in the UK there were elections happening, and all of my friends are left liberals, so everyone was voting Labour, and literally I didn't know, I think, almost anyone who voted otherwise, right? And then suddenly, like, everyone basically was convinced that Labour's gonna win. I think I was kind of convinced, but I was kind of able to see that, this is only what I interact with. So it's not a clear picture of and representation of what's going on out there in the world. And then when conservatives won, all of my friends were shocked and devastated. And so that clearly showed me how political echo chambers work. And it's very interesting because it's very convincing when you are in one of them. So, what are the dangers of political polarization? Well, there are obvious ones, like wars, political conflict, protests, and hate crimes. But it also facilitates social divisiveness more, and it may result in socioeconomic inequalities, poverty, lack of access to food and resources, extreme wealth for some, and extreme poverty for others. And also that the fact that people, and especially politicians, being caught up in things and matters that do not really matter at all, instead of solving real issues. So what can we do about it? Well, based on everything I've said and read, conversation. Conversation is the main thing, but not what we think a conversation is, or how we have conversations normally, or how we have been having them so far. We have to understand that we are here together, and we share this world and systems that we created. And we have to understand that we have differences, and we have to understand them and where they came from. The most important thing I think that we can do is to listen. To listen and try to see someone else's point of view, even or especially if you disagree. To actively search for another point of view. To actively search for someone who will tell you that you are wrong. And we have to remember that there is no shame in being wrong. You shouldn't be afraid of being wrong. Don't be afraid. Being wrong means that you can learn something new. And we have to do that, especially when we realize that, your moral judgments and your moral arguments, if they are not justifiable in a logical way, that means your elephant is speaking. And it's not necessarily right. And I'm not saying it's not valid. It is valid. But you have to be ready to change your perspectives. Observe your behavior. Be curious instead of being judgmental. So as you can see, there is way more to morality than you probably thought before. It's not at all black and white, different shades of grey. This relates to further conversations about everything, really. Anything from whether we have free will, what about our human perception of things and reality. It leads to this current woke culture, cancel culture, political correctness. I hope that I shed some light on how complex human interactions are and can be, and how we have to have just more respect towards opinions others than our own. And, just empathy and willingness to actually talk to one another. So in the next episode, I will be probably talking about free will and human perception. So stay tuned for that. And if you like this episode and the podcast, follow me and subscribe on your podcast player. I am on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or anything else that you're using. Follow me on my Instagram as well. It's Intergalactic Banana Podcast. And if you have any queries, suggestions, and any feedback, I am more than happy to hear from you. So drop me an email at intergalacticbananapodcast@gmail.com. And for now, take care and be kind. Bye!